Maybe I'll tell you if, I don't know, you ask nicely. All right. Okay. Well, you're not calling the shots, Frank. I am. Who is Frank? And I'm not asking. I'm demanding that you tell me how. How do you do it? How do I do what? I don't know what you're talking about. So what you're telling me is this wasn't shot on film. Well, to me, it looks like it was shot on film. You know what I think? I think you're lying, Frank. I think it was shot on film, and that's that until you tell me otherwise. You really want to know how I color grade? I'll just tell you how I do it. My man, now we're getting somewhere. I use a film emulation plugin called Dehancer. I use it within Davinci Resolve, but it's compatible with pretty much every major editing software. Come on, I'll show you how I do it. Quick disclaimer. Before we start, I want to emphasize that I'm going to show you guys how I use Dehancer to get my specific look. Meaning, I'm going to focus more on the tools within Dehancer that I personally use, and I probably won't go into much details for any tools that I don't use. I'll try to keep this novice and intermediate friendly because I've noticed that most of the Dehancer tutorials on YouTube are targeted towards more experienced colorists, which can be intimidating for a beginner and scare them away. I do not consider myself a pro colorist. I just know what I want and know how to achieve it, which means you don't have to be a pro colorist to utilize Dehancer either. So let's get into it. All right, so first things first, I'm going to show you guys my color management setup. So I'm not going to go into too much details on what color management is, but for those of you that just want to know what my settings are, I have the color science on Davinci YRGB, and my timeline color space and output color space is set to Rec 709A. That's what I always keep it on. I edit on a Mac, so my color space is always set to Rec 709 Apple. This would change depending on what computer or monitor that you edit on, but these are my settings. All right, so we're on our color page. We have a pretty straightforward node tree setup. This is my go-to node tree. I use this for majority of my work, whether it be personal content or client work. And yeah, let's break it down. So first off, we have a denoise node. Then it goes to an exposure node, a correction node, a transform compound node, a power window compound node, a grade compound node, a final adjustment node, and a sharpen node that I pretty much never use, but I just keep it there just in case I want to add a tad bit more sharpness to the final look. So let's start off with this transform compound node. So this is for color space transform. I shoot on a Zcam in Zlog, and Davinci Resolve's color space transform does not have a color space transform profile for any of Zcam's Zlog profiles. So I use Cinematch, and let's enable this so we can see what it's doing. So I already have it set up to where it's going from Zcam Zlog 2 to ARRI Alexa Mini Log C. And the reason why I have it set to log C is because that is a log profile that Dehancer recognizes. Depending on what camera you use, you won't need to do this because Dehancer probably already has your log profile as a default setting. This is my workaround. All right, so let's go into the grade compound node. And as you can see, we have 3 nodes set up. We have the Dehancer node, a density node, and a split tone node that I may or may not use in this tutorial, but we're definitely going to be predominantly working within these 2 first nodes, Dehancer and density. So let's go ahead and enable this Dehancer node. From the jump, the moment it's enabled, you can see that it's already doing something to the image. It kind of adds a nice look to it. So let's just go through all of these tabs and see what tools that they offer. So this first tab is an input tab. This is where you put all of your camera information. And like I said, I converted my footage from Zcam's Zlog 2 to ARRI's Log C. Depending on your camera, you would go to vendor, pick the brand of your camera. You would pick your camera, then pick your log profile.
all of these settings, exposure, temp, this is adjusting your source clip. So this is adjusting exposure or temp before it actually touches any of the film emulation. But we want to adjust it as if we were adjusting an actual piece of film. So we're going to focus on the adjustments being made within these tabs. So the first tab we have is the film tab. This film tab is where you pick your film stock. So let's go ahead and enable that. So right now it's set to Kodak Vision 50D. This is what the 250D looks like. I usually go for Kodak, but you can pick any of these film stocks. They have a bunch of film stocks that I never even heard of, and some that are familiar that are normally used for film stills, which is interesting. Like they have Cinestill on here. They have a bunch of Fujifilm stocks, but I'm going to go with Kodak because I like Kodak's look. So we're going to go with the Kodak 50D. I'm going to keep that enabled. So the next tab is the film developer. This just helps you further develop your film look. Let's go ahead and enable that. We have film compression. What this does is compresses your highlights. Films tend to have much more dynamic range than digital, and it preserves the highlights. So this is emulating how the highlights respond to film. We have expand. This is to adjust your black point, white point. We have print. So the print would be equivalent to the film stock that you would print your final product on to then play it on a projector or, whatever the source may be that you're playing it on. You don't have to use a print film stock. I do to further the look, and I stick to Kodak. And yeah, I just like the look that it gives. It gives it a very contrasty look. I like everything that I do to be very contrasty. That's just my look. So we have the color head. This is how you push colors and change the shadow, mid, and highlight tones on a film. We have film grain. Let's go ahead and enable that so you guys can see how it looks. And we also have different sizes for the film grain from 8mm all the way up to 65mm. We have halation, bloom, film damage, film breath, gate weave, overscan, vignette, monitor, output, LUT generator, and options. Like I said before, I'm not going to go into the details of any of the tools that I personally don't use. What I left open are the tools that I use to achieve my look. I will say the options tab is important because you can choose the quality. I keep mine at normal while I'm editing, and then I change it to high when it's time to export, just to prevent it from lagging. The only tool that I could see myself using maybe would be the overscan tool. It creates this border around your footage, but I just don't have any practical uses for most of these tools. So let's get into the film developer. So right off bat, this already looks pretty good. It's very contrasty. I don't really have to boost the contrast too much. So let's play with this color boost. Push it really far just so you guys can see what it's doing. And that looks pretty good right there. See the before and after. It's very subtle. It's just making the colors pop a little more, and I really like that. Next, let's go to our print, and let's see if we want to adjust the white balance or the exposure. So like I said before, adjusting white balance and exposure here versus in the input gives you a more film-like look. It's equivalent to editing the white balance and exposure on a film stock versus digitally adjusting the exposure. Yeah, probably boost the exposure just a little bit, not too much. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's go over to the color head. We can create split tone effects with the shadows if we wanted to, add a little blue. And this is why I don't always use my split tone node, because I end up doing a lot of my split toning within the Dehancer. Highlights are already pretty warm, so That looks pretty good. Added a little bit of separation. Maybe let's go even more. Added a little bit more color separation. That looks good. Let's add some film grain. I'm gonna go with 65 millimeter at ISO 50 because the grain is just a little bit more subtle. And it also lifts the shadows a bit. Let's see if we want to add any halation. Yeah, I think I like that. You can really see what it's doing on the chain around my neck and on the border of my beret. Yeah, I think I like that. And then let's also add some bloom. I really like what the bloom does. It really softens it up and blooms those highlights and gives it really film-like highlights. And you don't even need too much of it. See, even that is a lot. Maybe even 10. Yeah, that looks good. It softens it up. It's noticeable, but it's not overbearing. Yeah, so that is pretty much everything that I would touch in Dehancer. See how it looks in log? This is RE log. And this is after touching it with Dehancer. And as you can see, that does majority of the work. If I wanted to stop here, I could, to be honest. Like, this looks pretty good, especially if this was just for, social media content. This is good enough, but I'm very meticulous. So the next thing that I personally do is I go into this density node and I adjust the color density. Dehancer does have its own color density knob within the print, but you don't have too much control over what you're doing. It's just one slider. So what I like to do is go into Davinci's color slice tab. And here you can adjust the density to the individual colors and really fine tune how you want the density to look. And like I said, I'm very meticulous with how I color grade. I just enjoy color grading that way. So this is my go-to choice as far as color density. So the first thing that I'm going to do is go over to the global density and just add a bit of global density. Probably stop right there. So you can already see what that's doing. It makes the colors look more dense and full. So now that I've added, just general global density, I'm going to start touching the individual colors. So boost the density of that green, maybe even add a bit more saturation to it. Let's touch these reds. Let's make a selection as close as we can. Perfect. Let's actually shift this just a bit. You can really see it in my hat, what it's doing. So the skin tab is really orange. They just call it skin because most people's skin color fits into the orange spectrum. But yeah, this skin tab is really for the color orange. So we're gonna make our selection to really isolate that orange as much as we can. And then let's add some color density to the orange. We just got to be careful because it also affects the face and you don't want your face to start looking weird. I like that. That looks pretty good if you ask me. So let's do before and after. So this is how it looks before the density. This is how it looks when I add the density. And like I said, what this doing is it's emulating how film captures colors. Like if you watch a movie or a television show shot on film, the colors tend to look more rich and full, which in film terminology, they say the colors look more dense. They just have a much more like vivid and strong look to them. And that is what I just achieved within this density node. If we disable both the Dehancer and density node and go back to log, you can see that most of my grading is done just within two nodes, just within Dehancer and within the density node. But yeah, this looks really good. And like I said, before I even touch the density node, you can really be done right here. You can really be done right here if you want to. I'm going to take it one more step further. If you're interested in really taking it there, the next thing that I would do is I would go to the power window compound node, and I would start creating power windows around specific parts of the image to start shaping the light. So I shoot in a lot of spaces with uncontrolled light, whether it be natural light sources or just house lights within different spaces. And I may not have the option to control the light source. So the way I utilize my power windows is the way a gaffer would shape light on set. So right now what I'm doing is creating a power window around my face. And we're going to just add some gain to my face as if we were turning up the key light on my face. So we're going to over exaggerate it just so you can see what it's doing. Bring it down. You really don't need to go crazy. So you can see what that's doing. So you can see what that's doing. Brightens up my face. Next step, on this second parallel node, I would create another power window just around my body. Just around my body. Let's soften this as much as we can. And I would create an outside node for this power window around my body. Turn down the brightness around my body just a tad bit. Then I would turn up the brightness on my body just a tad bit. And what that is doing is emulating negative fill and a key light right on me. That looks really good. So next I would add one more parallel node. And we're going to add a power window that goes over just about the entire image. And what we're going to do is invert this, drop the gain to create a vignette. So every change that I made is a very subtle change. But when you disable that power window node, you can see what I did. And I shifted the focus of the light onto me. So this is before, this is after. And you can see that the left side of this frame was a little bit more bright with the power windows. It just helps me to stand out. Now on this final adjustment node, what I would do is, if I feel like the power windows just brought down the overall exposure a little bit too low, I'll just bring the exposure back up some if needed. Sometimes it's not needed. On this, I think I will. I think I like how that looks. Let's see, before, after. Yep, very subtle. You bringing up the gain and you still have that focused look from the power windows. I will probably take just a little bit of the warmth out, just a little bit to balance it. That looks good. Maybe even shift the color of the sky a little bit, the gradient of the sky, to just kind of emphasize that. Yeah, that looks good right about there. Like I said, I like my images very contrasty, so I would drop these shadows a bit more. You know what? I'm actually going to do that within Dehancer. Let's go to our film developer and just add a little bit more contrast. Just a tad bit. That looks good. That looks good right there. So let's disable this final adjustment node just to see what it did. Yeah, see how it would go. Pull some of that out. That's pretty much it. That is how I achieve my look. So for all of the people that ask me, what LUTs do I use? What film emulation power grades do I use? Now you know that I use Dehancer. I do not use any LUTs whatsoever. I have played around with some of the popular film emulation power grades. Some of them are cool, but others have very complicated node trees and the workflow is really cluttered. And I love how Dehancer centralizes all of their tools into one plugin. It really cleans up the workflow and makes things easier on me as the editor and colorist. Also, if you're a passionate colorist, Dehancer is doing the Colourist Awards, which is a worldwide color grading competition, and the winner gets $5,000 cash prize and a bunch of other cool prizes too. So I'll leave the link to the competition in my description. If you have any questions about Dehancer or about my color grading process in general, don't hesitate to ask in the comments. If you're new to my page, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.